Hello, you guys, and welcome back to the Ambitious Podcast. Today, we are talking with an incredible guest who is a certified holistic nutritionist who is coming in to talk to us about what we all know to be true, but health is wealth, right? And really going into how our health and the way that we are treating our bodies, whether that is with nutrition, whether it's with hormones, whether it's with sleep, stress levels, all of the factors that impact us as women, how can we start to take control of our health to be able to perform the way that we want, not only in our business, but also in our life for all of the goals that we have. And as someone myself who has had so much experience in the impact of not taking care of my health and what that did for my business, I knew that this was something that I wanted to bring to you guys to really have an intentional conversation of things that you can look for, of things you may want to address or go deeper into, and actually some tangible takeaways of like, hey, go do this if you're feeling like something is amiss right now with your health and it is impacting you in your life. So today we are joined by Grace Terrell. She's a certified holistic nutritionist who is based out of Miami. And a little bit about Grace. So Grace actually started Graceful Wellness after she herself was struggling with chronic stomach pains, really terrible bloating, fatigue, and honestly, just a ton of other uncomfortable symptoms. And for a while, she was somebody who really just kind of accepted that that was how her body was. She assumed that that was just normal. This is how my body feels. And it was only when it got to such a point that she just could not sustain with those symptoms anymore that she was like, okay, something has to give. So she had a lot of trial and error. She had a lot of things that she had tried between different types of foods, different types of supplements. And in this process of both getting her certification and doing the research and doing the knowledge side of things, paired with also the trial and error of literally trying and seeing what truly works so she can recommend that to people, she now has been able to fully heal her body. And also with this, has relieved herself of every single symptom that she was struggling with previously. So because of this, it really sparked her, inspiration to help other people with holistic healing and really allowed her to go super deep into the gut-brain connection, i.e., how is what we're eating making us feel and making us operate day to day? And since then, obviously, now has this graceful wellness business, an incredible platform that is on a mission to help people take back control of their health in a natural and sustainable way by introducing them to holistic approaches to both nutrition and lifestyle. So excited to dive into today's episode. Grace is going to be unpacking with us very tangible things that we can go do today and, just really giving you insight into why you may be experiencing the things that you're experiencing with your health and how to optimize your health for the big goals that you have. So with all that being said, let's get into today's episode. Hi, Grace. Thank you so much for joining. I'm so excited to dive in today. I was just saying in your intro, like how many people that I know struggle with their health. And I just think that there's so much you're going to be able to talk about today that people are going to go, okay, that's literally me. So I'm excited to dive into everything today.
Me too. I'm so excited to be here. You have such a professional podcast setup. I feel so casual over here. I don't have the headphones or the mic.
I know. To be fair, I usually, if it's not this podcast, I'm in the same scenario, me like on Zoom on my computer at home. So all good. I feel you. All right, girl, let's dive right into the meat of it. I was excited to have you on because like myself, I've gone through a lot of gut health issues and have had a lot of, the symptoms you talk about on your social. And by the way, guys, like her TikTok, her Instagram was just packed full of knowledge. So if you feel like you're getting light bulbs already from today, highly recommend you guys go follow her on social. But I really want to dive in because as the first initial piece of like, what is holistic wellness? Like, I think people sometimes look at like a nutritionist, they look at like, yes, I need to have movement, I need to be working out, but maybe tell me a little bit for our listeners about what is holistic wellness? Like, how do you feel it kind of differs in its approach?
Yeah. So holistic nutrition is basically encompassing all of the aspects of health. So it's not just the food you eat or what type of workouts you do. It's like a whole mind, body, soul. And it's looking at the body as like a system, not separate units and separate organs. And everything is just like all together and all working as a system.
Right.
So my approach to nutrition is not just about the food that you're eating. It's about everything, how you think about your food, how you feel about your food, how you feel about yourself. Everything is just all incorporated into how you take care of yourself. So it's holistic.
Yeah, like sleep and supplements and nutrition and movement and like stress and hormones and just like literally everything that kind of works in an ecosystem in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, amazing. So I think with that, the number one thing that I know a lot of people struggle with, and myself included, I feel like it's been like a constant battle for me, is nutrition? Because I think that there's, let's just be honest, like so much noise around like gluten-free, dairy-free, have caffeine, don't have caffeine, like intermittent fasting, keto. And people are kind of like, okay, so what is the right way? Like how, if someone is feeling right now, nutrition wise, like their gut, they're getting bloating and all of these things. Like for me, a year ago, my stomach was constantly distended, constantly bloated. I had awful acne, awful fatigue. Couldn't figure, I was like, I thought I just like my body was like against me. Like I genuinely didn't understand what the root of it was. And then in going into everything and starting some elimination practices, I actually saw a drastic difference in my body and how I felt. So talk to us a little bit about, this idea of nutrition, like the right and the wrong way. Like if someone wants to start to reevaluate things, where do they even start with all of this noise?
Yeah, that's one of the main issues that people that come to me talk about. They're like, I'm just so freaking confused because there's so much conflicting information
Right.
on like TikTok and Instagram now. And it's amazing that we have access to all of this stuff, but it also confuses us. And then we end up in this cycle of these roller coaster diets of trying keto, trying to be vegan, trying paleo,
Yeah.
trying intermittent fasting, like you
Yeah.
said. And I feel like that roller coaster in and of itself is what creates a lot of these issues because our body is just like, what the heck are you doing to me?
Yeah.
Like the body loves consistency and being consistently fed nutrition. And when we're trying all these different things and cutting out a bunch of different big food groups, it's really confusing and it's a stress on our body.
Mm.
So I think like the number one thing is you first have to like evaluate your diet history and take a good look at it and be like, okay, from the point now till 5 years back, how have I actually been feeding myself? Have I been consistent? Have I been getting like enough protein, getting enough carbohydrates, getting enough healthy fats, vegetables? Or have I been going through these phases of cutting out carbs, cutting out
Mm.
meat, cutting out fats?
Right.
Because that just puts our nervous system in such a state of stress. And that's what causes a lot of these hormone imbalances and gut health issues. So I think first, take a look at your past diet history and how you've been taking care of yourself and audit that. And if you notice a pattern and you notice you haven't really been like consistently taking care of yourself in a normal, healthy way, then first try just like doing that baseline because everyone knows what foods are healthy and what foods aren't healthy.
Right.
But all of the noise, like you said, just creates a crazy disconnect. And then looking at the ingredients in your food.
Yeah.
So like, are you eating a ton of processed foods? Are all of these like fake health foods, like the low fat, low sugar, zero sugar things, like are you consuming a lot of those? Because those ingredients are also causing a disruption in your gut, which then causes a disruption in your hormones. And then you end up in that place where you're like, my body is fighting me right now. So I think those two things, take a look at the ingredients and then take a look at if you've been on that diet roller coaster.
Right. And I was actually just thinking as you're saying that, like one of the things that I thought was like, okay, like kind of to be honest, elimination, remove all dairy. And then what was interesting was I was like, okay, I'm going to switch to oat milk. And so I switched to oat milk. And then someone said, careful because all of the gum's in it. And I was like, what are you talking about? And I go and I look on the back and it has like all these ingredients in addition to the oats. So they're like, it's almost, to be honest, just as inflammatory for your gut as having the dairy would be. If it was like actually good dairy, it might honestly not be as bad as what you're consuming right now because it's still not really pure. So I guess something that I'm curious about, because you said like eating more healthy. In your opinion, like what would you say is healthy eating? Because I know you eat all kinds of food. Like I know you eat all different things and you still like have a very balanced approach. Like it's not like you're saying, hey, eat lentils and lettuce and like that's your life now. You very much have a balanced approach. So I guess I'm curious, like to you, because you have really mastered this, what do you deem like in your mind and in your lifestyle with yourself and clients to like really be balanced?
Yeah. It's a tricky question to answer because I think it really depends on the person and the state of their system. Like
Mm.
if a client comes to me with the symptoms that you were saying, like your stomach is constantly distended, you have acne, you have no energy, then usually it is necessary to go through a phase where you're cutting out gluten, you're cutting out dairy, you're cutting out inflammatory ingredients and processed
Right.
foods because you have to get the inflammation down. And if you don't go through that phase of being like a little bit restrictive, you're kind of just like prolonging the amount of time that you're going to feel like shit,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And so it is necessary to go through like an elimination phase so that you can get the inflammation down and then start to reintroduce things and figure out what's actually bothering you.
Mm.
Like personally, when I was going through like all of my own gut health stuff, I cut out so much stuff and it sucked. But now, because I've gotten my body to a state where it can like handle these foods, I'm totally good. It's more about fixing the body rather than like being so careful with like the input. You know, like you have to fix the system so that
Got it.
you're able to tolerate more foods. Sometimes it is the food. Like if you have a intolerance to gluten, like I don't eat gluten because I know it just makes me feel
Yeah.
crappy. But like I had cut out dairy, I had cut out a lot of carbs, even like natural sugars, and those were triggering me at a time. But now because I've gotten my body to a state where it's healthier, I can have those things. So it kind of just depends on the timeline and the individual.
Got it. Okay. Cause I think that kind of, that's interesting that you say that because I think there's so many people that believe like if you have any kind of reaction to dairy, you don't eat dairy anymore. If you have any reaction to gluten, you're done with gluten for the rest of your life. Like people kind of have this,
Yeah.
it's eliminated forever. So really what you're saying is you need to eliminate it temporarily to kind of let yourself come back to baseline. And then when you're ready, reintroduce it. When you say like get yourself to baseline, what does that look like for somebody? If you feel like, okay, I'm definitely feeling irritated with something that's going on here. So if you do that elimination, how do you like what are some things that someone should be considering if they are like, okay, like I want to do this, I want to take it seriously, but what does that actually look like?
Like as far as the elimination
Yeah,
phase, it's just hard because everyone's so different. With my clients that have gut health issues, it's usually gluten and dairy,
got it.
like, and then sometimes legumes like nuts, seeds, beans, those things can be really irritating. So if you're like really, really inflamed, it usually looks like protein and cooked vegetables and fruit.
Okay.
Like if you're on the extreme end.
Okay.
And that's for a couple months.
Got it.
And I know it sounds like really
Yeah,
crazy,
I'm
but like,
sure people are like, great, great. But it's not forever. But
great.
it's not forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not forever. That's not something that you should be eating for the rest of your life. But you have to figure out which foods are not irritating you so that you can live and not be so stuck with these horrible stomach issues and feeling like you can't get out of bed in the morning and you're so scared to eat anything because you're so worried about being bloated and then you don't want to go socialize. And it's just this
Yeah.
cycle that you have to get people out of
Yeah.
so that they can start feeling normal and feeling like themselves.
Well, even as you say that, something that I like, obviously, I know mine was weight gain, acne, bloating, but I'm also wondering, like, even outside of that, are there things that people may want to stay like aware of or things that they want to look for that you're like, this could be a symptom that you really need to kind of be looking at your health?
Yeah, I think extreme fatigue is one thing. If you're just after your meals, you feel like you have to go lay down because you're so tired, that's a sign that your body's like not digesting things properly.
Mm.
If you're breaking out in like weird rashes or hives, that's a sign. If your hair is falling out more than usual, if your periods are really painful or really irregular. Yeah, those are the main ones besides like the typical digestive
Yeah,
issues.
that was actually what sparked mine was like literally half of my head of hair fell out. And I was like, okay, what's going
Yeah.
on? Because everyone around me was like, so your hair, like, do we want to talk about the elephant in the room? Like, where's your hair going? And so then it was kind of like that introducing all of the other symptoms that I started to have awareness to. Cause I think, at least for me, sometimes I was making excuses. Like I'd be like, oh, I'm tired, but oh, it's just because I had a really long week. Or I gained weight, but I'm just like, oh, I'm not being like super consistent. And I would always have this excuse of just like, it must be something else. It's probably my fault of this thing that I'm doing. Or my hair was falling out. So I assumed it must be the shampoo. And obviously I changed like 4 different shampoos and the hair is still falling out. So I think it also is tough because it's hard to like decipher what the true root cause of what these symptoms are like connected to is.
Yeah, it's so hard. I think that's the trickiest thing because like even me, like my face broke out so bad a couple months ago, and I was like, "What the heck is going on?" And I was like, "It's my shampoo, it's my foundation, whatever."
Yeah.
And it's hard to pinpoint like what it is that is actually happening, and it's usually a combination of things, which makes it tricky. So it's typically like maybe you're going through a stressful time and your nervous system, like you're more in fight or flight than rest or digest. And then maybe you're letting yourself slip in certain areas, and you kind of just have to pull everything back in and recenter yourself and be patient too, because I feel like we think things should be fixed like instantly. And when that doesn't
Yeah.
happen, then we just jump to the next thing. And you're like, okay, now I have to drastically change my diet. Or like, maybe I have a parasite. Maybe I need to do a parasite cleanse.
Yeah.
Or maybe I need to go get my hormones tested because I have some crazy hormone imbalance that I have no idea of. And sometimes that is the case, but 99% of the time it's not. And you don't have to do anything drastic. You kind of just have to like recenter yourself, which isn't the answer people want to hear,
Right.
but
Right.
it's the truth.
That was like, as you're saying that, I'm like, that's literally me, because I was like, I have to go get my hormones tested. I got like, I was actually curious to pick your brain about this too, because I got intolerance testing. And I've talked to a lot of different people about this because they're like, I do believe in it. I don't believe in it. So kind of, I guess why I'm saying this is I got intolerance testing, and the intolerance testing, for anyone who's not familiar, is essentially where you go get a blood test and they give you kind of like a panel of like low, medium, high of what your body has resistance to. And that's like dairy, nuts, beans, vegetables, all kinds of different things are like the most common things that people eat. And I got this panel back, and it was like, I was allergic to like most of the world, like, or like intolerant, right, to most of the world. And it was like no gluten, no dairy, no almond, no oats. And I was like, for sure, like, this is great. So I go through this, and she was like, the best thing you can do is cut it out. So I was like, so like, I'm just drinking water now. Like, what's happening? There's nothing here that's actual like substance. I literally removed so much food. And what I found was, when I did that, I felt so restricted that I wanted it even more because I couldn't have all of these things. So I also talked to another person that's very similar within your space, and they were kind of saying that like it kind of is a flawed system to get intolerance testing because it's not necessarily accurate. So like if someone's feeling like, okay, like, do I have intolerances? Like, what is this root thing that's causing issues for me? What do you think about that testing? Do you think that that's effective? What are your thoughts on it?
I think it can be helpful, but I totally agree. It's a very flawed test because what it's detecting is the antibodies to different proteins that are found in the foods. So basically what happens is when you take those tests, if you have leaky gut, which is basically you have a really thin layer that lines your intestines from your bloodstream, which is like where most of your immune system is.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone has this happen, but there's a cell wall, and every time you eat, it opens and closes. And if you have a damaged gut and you have leaky gut, what happens is those cell walls stay open for too long. And so then the proteins and the particles from those foods pass into your immune system and set off an alarm. And so if you have an irritated gut, every food that you're eating is passing through. And so your immune system is responding. And so then when you take those tests, every food that you're regularly eating is showing up on the test because your immune system is creating antibodies to those foods.
Right.
And so when people get those tests back, they're like, well, this is everything I eat. And it's like, yeah, it's not the food, it's you.
Right.
Which is the problem.
which is interesting, because I feel like the reason that I love so much like your program and how you approach things is I think sometimes the thing that I have found with naturopaths, for example, is it kind of feels like this never ending discovery. Like you go and you're getting the testing and you're like, okay, great. We have these intolerances. Let's add on these supplements, see how that goes, check in a couple weeks. Then let's see how this goes, check in a couple weeks later. And it kind of feels like 2 years fly by and you're still discovering, how to introduce all of these things. So I'm wondering, like, when someone really wants to heal in this way and like they're going through like what you're talking about and they don't want to cut out all of these foods, like if someone wants to heal, do you feel like that kind of is the main way? Like when you're saying elimination and then reintroducing, do you feel like you're ever done, I guess, is my question. Like when you're going through this healing phase, do you feel like it's ever like you should be at this place, or do you kind of feel like it's an ongoing practice?
I think it's an ongoing practice in some ways. I think it's very stressful to feel like there's always something wrong with you because to your point with naturopaths and functional medicine doctors and people that do all of this really excessive testing, excessive in my opinion, one, it can be so helpful. It really can. But if you keep looking, you're going to find something. There's no perfect specimen, right? Like there's always something going on in our bodies. There's always bacteria that's not supposed to be there.
Right.
Like we are an organism. So there's things that are living in us. There's imbalances that are always working themselves out. And I think if you go at it from that perspective, there's always going to be something wrong and you're going to feel like you're on this never ending hamster wheel of shit. I'm like constantly chasing all these things and trying to fix all this stuff that's wrong with me. I don't think that's a good way to look at it. I think our bodies are always changing so much, and we need to be tuned in enough to understand ways that we can adapt. But you shouldn't be so obsessive over having to cut out all these things. And like I said before, if you're really struggling, there is a period of time where you do have to be restrictive, but you have to know that that's not forever. And healing is never a linear process. I'm going through stuff now too, and I'm a nutritionist and I should know everything, but like my body is
Yeah.
always like still adjusting and changing. So
Right.
like, yeah, to an extent, it is a process that you're going to have to do for the rest of your life, but it shouldn't be this like crazy stressful experience every day, and you shouldn't be obsessing over it.
Right. And I feel like that kind of translates a little bit as well into hormones, because I know I was actually watching you on another podcast talking about the impact of hormones and women's cycle on how they feel. And I definitely want to pick your brain about that gut brain connection and kind of going a little bit deeper on that. But I also think a lot of what we talk about of how we're feeling, we very much don't connect to hormones. Like we constantly are like food, exercise, sleep. Like it's like this three, maybe water. Like, am I getting enough water? Right. But aside from that, we never usually go deeper. So I'm curious, like for the women who are listening who feel like maybe they have never even dove into anything hormone oriented, what is something that you feel like maybe is a misconception or something that people don't know about the importance of hormones on their health?
Yeah. I think, well, hormones dictate everything, especially in women. You know, there's a stereotype that women are crazy and we're so emotional and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, we are emotional because of our
Yeah.
hormones.
Yeah. We're
You know,
physically built that way. So yeah.
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 Yeah. Like, think about the cycle of a woman over her lifespan, right? Pre puberty, you're a certain way. And then you get your period and your hormones change and your entire personality changes. And you're like stepping into this new body and you're like, oh my God, your sexuality, your emotions, like all of these things are happening. And you're that way up until menopause. And you hear women talk about going through menopause and they're like, I'm so depressed. I'm dealing with all of these emotions and all of these things that feel like my world's crashing in on me. And that's not one person. It's like every woman
Right.
deals with that to an extent.
Right.
And that's because we're so different from men. Men kind of operate on this 24-hour clock. We operate on a 28-day cycle. And if you really tune in and pay attention to when you're more tired, when you're more moody, when you're more energized, when you feel really social, it is kind of like a hormonal like roller coaster in a way. And it's really, really interesting. And I've recently tuned into that with myself and I'm like, I'm feeling like really irritated today. And then I'm like, oh, it's because like my period's coming,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And I think of it like, you know, we can fight against that and be like, shit, it shouldn't be this hard to be a woman. We
Mm.
shouldn't feel like we're going through this emotional roller coaster every month. But it's also a very beautiful thing that we can feel this crazy range of emotions. And it shouldn't feel like you're going up and down and up and down. It shouldn't be so intense.
Right.
If it's really intense and you're feeling like you can't get out of your bed in the morning, like before your period, then there might be something wrong with your hormones. But like we all have these emotional fluctuations because of our hormones and energy fluctuations and you know insulin sensitivities. Like all of these things are correlated to our endocrine system.
Right.
And it's really cool.
Well, as you're saying that, like when you say you feel like you're kind of diving even more into sinking into it, like I know a couple women who will actually like sync their work schedules around it, like having like their busy weeks, their slow weeks, because they know they're like the week before, it's just not happening. Like it's just, they just know how they feel. So because of that, they work their work around it. So when you say you kind of try to sync more with it, what does that look like for you or with your clients?
Well, me personally, I'm just starting to realize just emotionally and energetically now, I haven't really changed my lifestyle, but I've been more aware of like, okay, if I'm feeling this way, let me like listen to my body and slow down a little bit instead of trying to fight against it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And with my clients, I tell them that too. I don't like to get too into the whole like cycle syncing thing. And I think it can be really powerful for people, but I also think it's just another layer of all this stuff that we have to worry about. Like if I'm in my luteal phase, I should be,
Yeah.
you know, doing only yoga and Pilates. Like it's not always like that. We can change day to day too. It's just about listening to your body and not always trying to ram through the way you're feeling.
Well, that's why I was so excited to have you on, because I feel like your approach compared to most is so balanced. Like you don't feel like you're getting another project to work on when you're fixing your health. And I think that trying to get your gut in check, but then also consider a new sleep routine, but then also move differently, but then also consider your cycle. And you're like, I have a job. Like, how am I supposed to do all of this? So I think with your approach and what I know about like your programs and, the way that you show up and the way you talk about this, it is so balanced. It feels so sustainable. So a little bit of a segue that I really would love to dive into is the connection between like the gut and the brain. And really, like, we obviously, yes, food, yes, hormones, but also looking at, with that, the way we're feeling. Like, I know a lot of people that I will interact with will say like, oh, I'm struggling with anxiety, or I'm struggling with like feeling like agitated and things like that. Wondering if you can kind of give us, like, I feel like there's books and books like you could take, to be honest, let's be honest, like a year and diving into learning this. But as like a Cole's Notes, give us a little bit of a 101 of like what we really need to know about the gut and the brain. Because I think a lot of the time we kind of think, oh, there's mental health and then there's physical health. They're two totally separate entities and they need their own individual plan. And at certain points, like, I very much am open about mental health. I think that everyone should have like plans for each, but I don't think we talk nearly enough about like the way that the two are working together. So wondering if you can just kind of expand on that for people who feel like maybe like diving into researching the gut brain connection for them feeling a little bit overwhelming. And I know this is literally what you do. So kind of just, things that you feel that we really should know when it comes to the gut brain connection.
Yeah, this is my favorite topic. And it's crazy how much we've only like scratched the surface on what we know about this stuff. Like, they're researching like crazy on it because it's so impactful. And I always like to say, like, just think about when you're really nervous, you get butterflies in your stomach. Or like when you're really scared or you hear like really bad news, your stomach drops, like you get that sensation. That's a perfect example of how the gut and the brain work in sync. Or for me, like, when I broke up with my ex-boyfriend, I had the worst stomach ache. And I was like, what the heck? And then I was like, oh my God, it's the gut brain connection right there.
Yeah.
And it's a number of things. The one thing that is mostly controlling it is the vagus nerve. And it's this nerve that starts at the top of your head and goes into your core and kind of spreads out. And that's basically the driver of your nervous system. And that regulates so much, from like the speed of digestion to your stress levels, everything. So that's one main component of it. The other thing is about 90% of your serotonin is produced in your gut. And your serotonin is basically, it's kind of like a stress hormone, but also like it makes you happy and energized. And so if that whole process is not balanced, or you're not producing enough serotonin, or it's not being translated properly, you're going to be really anxious or you're going to be depressed. And all of those things together create this cycle of being stressed and anxious. And then you're having a stomach ache. And then you're like, do I have a stomach ache because I'm stressed, or am I stressed because I have a stomach ache? It's this like cycle. Yeah. And you don't produce enough serotonin if your gut is imbalanced, because the bacteria in your gut kind of work hand in hand with that whole process. So yeah, the gut brain connection is a huge component of what I work with my clients on. And like making sure you're sitting down to eat and chewing your food and you're being like calm and relaxed is so, so important. I've had clients that just do that. I'm like, don't work while you eat. Like, have
scrolling TikTok, the amount of people who like scroll TikTok or Instagram while eating. I'm like, I can't eat. People will literally be at a restaurant and all of them are on their phone while they're eating. Yeah.
And like for some people that's fine, but like if you're dealing with stomach issues and bloating, that's like the worst thing you can do, because you need to be tuned into your food and tuned into that process for you to be able to like digest properly. Because if your body is in that fight or flight state, your digestion like slows way down. And that's when the food starts fermenting in your stomach. And that's when you get the bloating.
Okay. That's so interesting when you say, am I stressed because of my gut, or am I stressed and that's impacting my gut, right? Is the gut the source, or is the mind the source? And I think for myself, I'm very open about the fact that I've struggled for a while with like anxiety and things. And, if you go to, at least here in Canada, if you go to a doctor and you say you have anxiety, all of what you're talking about is not even a conversation. You go and it's essentially like, hey, yep, like here's some things that you can do that are natural, i.e. do meditation, go on walks, go work out. If that doesn't work, come back and like we can talk about medication. nobody asks about, okay, like talk to us about your diet, talk to us about, right? Like that connection is not even discussed. And for me, like it was never a question that I was asked in trying to heal any of like the mind components that I was struggling with. I know so many women who are building their business right now who are so stressed. And we were just chatting, guys, before we hopped on about like this like hot girl stomach issue like trend that's going around of like classic me stomach issues. And I think that's so crazy that we've normalized that as like a trend of an identity for people to connect with. But there are so many women who right now are like pushing themselves at all levels to, you know, achieve goals outside of business, in business. And I think their bodies are feeling it. I have talked to so many people who feel like my body is fighting me. My brain is so like, yes, let's go. But my body is fighting back. And there is that constant relationship between the two. So just as you said, is it my mind or is it my body? How do you eat? Where do you even start? Because I feel like that can feel so overwhelming to try to figure out which one truly is the source.
Yeah. Usually it's both.
Okay.
And
Okay.
it's funny because very high achieving type A women, which is a lot of the women that I work with too, we tend to like, you know, intellectualize things and push things down a lot.
Yeah.
And so we'll often feel stress in our bodies before it actually makes it up to our brain and we process it emotionally.
Okay.
Because we just push through everything.
Yeah.
And so all of that stress and emotion gets stored in our body and we're like, I'm not stressed, I'm fine. Until we hit that tipping point where we're like, okay, something's wrong here. And we hit that threshold and then we have to backtrack all the way,
Right.
you know? So I see that a lot in very like high achieving women and business owners. It's a lot of that. We don't think that we're stressed until we feel it physically.
As you're saying that, I'm like, that was me. Like in my mind, I was like, everything's fine. And meanwhile, my whole body was like screaming at me, something is wrong here. Like, pay attention to me. And then it kind of all came to a head, I would say like about just over a year ago, because my body it was like alarming how different I felt, but I was just kind of like tuned out to it, as I said, because I was like, oh, I've just been busy with work. I haven't been working out as much. And I like kind of like made all these excuses only to realize like your stress levels are just so high. And I think also as entrepreneurs, because obviously you have your own business as well, I think we normalize because of entrepreneurship. This is just a stressful game and this is just how it's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is like about, like, I know you work very hard. I know the ins and outs of like obviously your business, but I also feel like you have such a mastery of the flow state as well, in the sense of like the balance of it all. So I'm thinking for the women who are just like really pushing right now, who are like, okay, like next target. The thing that I know is that all of them are like, once I get here, then I'll focus on my health. And so I'm curious of like signs of stress. If someone is feeling like, oh, I'm fine, and they're having that dialogue you're talking about, what are indicators that they could even like self-assess to say, are you? Or because like if this is happening, you're probably stressed and you need to be looking at it.
Yeah. I think when was the last time you like went outside and chilled for a couple hours? You know, if you're not doing that, you're probably stressed. If you're waking up in the morning and your heart is like racing immediately and your thoughts are going a million miles an hour, that's a sign. If you're waking up in the middle of the night and you're like thinking about a million things, that's a sign. If you can't fall asleep at night, like we were talking about earlier, if your hair is falling out, if you feel like you're not eating, but you're like gaining weight weirdly, that's a sign. If you feel like you wake up in the morning and your face is a little bit like swollen or puffy, that's a sign. There's a lot. Like you just have to like tune into your body and be like, am I good? Like, am I centered right now? Or like, when was the last time I sat in silence for 5 minutes, you know, and didn't think about business?
Yeah. Which for me was the most terrifying thing to do. There was a study I saw someone talking about on their podcast, and they were saying how they asked a bunch of different people, both men and women, to sit with their own thoughts or to get an electric shock. So like you either have to sit with your own thoughts. Yeah. Sit with your own thoughts for 5 minutes or get an electric shock. And I think it was, don't quote me exactly, but I think it was around men, 70%, women 40 said, give me the shock over sitting with our own thoughts. So like,
that's crazy.
It's crazy. And I think that we're in such like a society of getting all these like alerts all the time. We're in this constant state of like constantly having information coming at us, especially as a business owner, when you're especially doing on social media, same thing. There's just so many notifications. So I think not having that space, you don't really realize that you need it until you take it. At least that's what I found. was like, as soon as I had space, for me personally, I found this like overflood of emotion. And I was like, what is happening here? Like I would do breath work or meditation and I was like, something's going on, because I would get really emotional and all like the stress of my body, like you're saying, started to be like, okay, great. We're actually in tune now. Here we go. And I was kind of like ready to process what my body was already feeling. But my mind, as you said, was like turned off, that I wouldn't even accept that was like a state that I was feeling.
Yeah, it's crazy. We're constantly so stimulated that we're so off center, and we don't realize it because it's just like the world that we live in now.
Right.
And that's like where it comes back to like balance. And I made a reel about this the other day. I heard this quote. It was like, you don't need balance, you need contrast.
Mm.
And we think about balance as just being a little bit of everything all the time. And that can be good in certain ways, but like sometimes you need to completely shut off, you know?
Yep.
And then you can go really, really hard in your business, but then you need to shut off. And if you go really, really hard and then go to balance and then really, really hard and then balance, you're never getting that shut off.
Mm.
And your body feels that. And like we were talking about before, like you're going to hit that threshold point where everything comes crashing down and you don't want to get there. So like you do need to completely shut off for your nervous system to like recenter. And that can be like 10 minutes a day, but like you have to disconnect because it's just too much noise all the time.
Right. Right. And I think like even going back to balance, because I think that is something like in going into all the factors or the areas that you look at, like nutrition is, yes, like one part of it. Hormones is another part of it. And I know like obviously with that, when you start to understand that, looking at supplements to see like what can we do with food, what needs to be supplemented to kind of get you back to that, balance or that level of a starting point. But something that I also know in addition to that is like there's the outside factors. So things like sleep, like the amount of people that I feel like do not take sleep seriously. And it kind of seems like, yeah, okay, like you fall asleep, you wake up, like that's the start and the end of it. But like people are on their phones scrolling TikTok for 3 hours and then being like, okay, I'm going to go sleep now. Right. Like and even when you wake up, like how you wake up and how you go to sleep, I think also determines like when you think about how much time we're asleep in comparison to how much we're awake and like the amount of hours in our lifetime, it's insane. And I think not nearly enough people focus on like, how do I actually get the most out of that? Because I think being intentional about a strategy for that, just the same as you would for your workouts or nutrition, is just as important. So if someone feels like they are that person maybe right now who's scrolling TikTok for 3 hours and then being like, okay, I'm gonna go to sleep. First of all, as I say that, what do you think about that? What do you feel like? Do you feel like, is it an issue? You're like, do your thing. Like, what do you think about it?
No, I think it's a huge issue, not only because it's so stimulating to the brain, but like looking at blue light right before you go to sleep completely screws up your circadian rhythm. And to your point, you could be asleep for 8 hours, but what's the quality of your sleep? I have an Aura ring, and I remember the first time I looked at my stats, which these things aren't completely accurate, but I was like, oh, I'm actually like not really sleeping that well because my heart rate's elevated. And that can be for so many different reasons. If you have a drink at night, if you're watching something on TV that's like an action movie or something, that's stimulating you too much.
Right.
And our circadian rhythm regulates all of our hormones. And so if you're not sleeping well and if you're staring at your phone for 3 hours before you go to bed and you're just laughing at random, it's like, so it's not natural, It's like you see a really funny thing and you're like dying laughing, and then the next one it's so sad and you're crying and you're like on this emotional roller coaster before you go to bed. And it just sets you up not in a good way. So I always say, have your room, your bedroom be like your sanctuary. Like your bedroom is for sleeping. That's it. Like keep your phone out of your room. And then in the morning you can set your alarm and then you have to get up and you can't hit snooze.
Okay.
So it's like,
okay. So no phone in the room. And then I'm assuming then no TV either.
Yeah, ideally. I don't have a TV in my room. Okay. I mean, some people need, like I have this friend that needs to watch The Office or have The Office on as they sleep all night. And I'm like, what is wrong with you? Like just put on some like white noise or something. Yeah.
I mean, I will be honest, that was me. When I moved in with Phil, we had a TV in the bedroom and he was like, absolutely not. Like I used to have it on all night to have background noise while sleeping. And like for him, it was the worst sleep because obviously like you're watching TV all night for hours. And for me, it was background noise. But he was like, get a sleep machine, like get one of those like background noises of like thunderstorm sound, like whatever it is. No TV, no light, I guess was the issue. So you feel like sound is okay, but not necessarily having like this, the stimulating of the light in the room.
Yeah, because the light goes into your eyes and then it's signaling to your body that it's daytime. And that's creating
Okay.
this cascade of hormones in your body that like cortisol, and that throws off your cortisol. So at night your cortisol should be the lowest and your melatonin should be the highest. And then as you sleep, the melatonin wears off and your cortisol comes up and wakes you up in the morning.
Okay.
So if you're staring at your phone at night and it's really bright, that's signaling to your body to produce cortisol. And then you can't fall asleep and you don't sleep as soundly. So it's mostly like the light on your phone. There's actually a setting on the iPhones where you can turn off the blue light. And so it's more like orangey red toned.
Okay.
So that's a way to like get away with it if you have to work late at night.
Okay.
But ideally, no screens like 2 hours before bed.
Okay. Okay. So like before sleeping, like for me, I would do like journaling, reading, something to kind of like get my brain tired in a way. And then I have kind of like essential oils, all of this stuff that kind of is like this routine of like 5 steps that I feel like tells my body like, okay, it's happening. This is what we're doing. And that's that. I also, which I'm curious to pick your brain about, I take CBD to go to sleep, or CBN, sorry. So there's no THC in it, but like, what do you think about things like that in the sense of like things that help or aid in sleeping? Or do you feel like it should just be trying to get your body into that like traditional rhythm?
I think it's fine. I think it's great. A lot of people need stuff to help them go to sleep. And life is always going to be stressful and you're not going to sleep soundly every night. And so if there's something natural that you can use to help your body get into that rest mode, I think that's totally fine. You know, if you're taking some like pharmaceutical that's like super strong, like a strong sedative, then I would look at like some lifestyle factors and see like, okay, what can I adjust to help this? But if you're doing all of the things and you just need a little extra something to help you wind down, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Got it. Okay. Now say, okay, for me, goes to sleep. And one of the things that was very triggering for me that like, again, down the rabbit hole of TikTok that I came across was that you shouldn't be having coffee first things first when you wake up in the morning. So for me, that was extremely sad because I was like literally half asleep, like stumbling to my coffee machine. But what do you think is like actually the best if someone wants to really crush their day energy wise? Like, okay, like we've optimized our sleep, we're being intentional about what we're eating, we're moving our body. How do we really set ourselves up for success for the rest of the day after waking up?
This is where blood sugar comes in, which is a hot topic right now. And I think for a really good reason, because if you, like most people wake up and they have like a bowl of oatmeal or like pancakes or like a bagel or something. And that's fine. But like 2 hours later, you're going to crash and you're going to need something else. And that sends you on this blood sugar roller coaster of craving carbohydrates and sugar all day. And that's going to send your anxiety really high and then low and then high and then low. And nobody wants that.
Yeah.
So I think first thing in the morning, having your breakfast centered around protein and fats is the best way to go because that's going to satiate you and it's not going to spike your blood sugar really high. And then you're going to stay fuller for longer and it just sets you up on a good tone for the day. You can have coffee with that breakfast. I'm not saying no coffee. I would die without coffee. But like have something that's like supporting your body at the same time.
Right. And even as you say that about fats, like when you see all of these diets of like keto is the way, intermittent fasting is the way, like add carbs, don't do carbs. Like for me, the blood sugar thing a year and a half ago when everything had happened was actually a big thing that came forward. Because when I had my blood tested, they were like, whoa, your like resting glucose is not where it needs to be. And so I actually ended up getting like the same monitor. You can just get it usually at like a drugstore. And went and bought one of these monitors to just like test my glucose levels for like 2-3 weeks, just to see like where were we at with things, to literally see like it sends to your phone the number, like when you scan this device on your arm, you go and you eat something that you believe is balanced. And even if it's a matter of just like coffee with cream and you have like maybe like a bagel or you have like that with eggs and you feel like, oh, this is good, like it's all balanced. But then to see how your body reacts to it is really interesting because I would think in my mind it was all good. And then as soon as after the meal, like usually about 10 minutes later, 20 minutes later, I would check my sugars, they were spiking. And I started to actually see the connection between like, okay, this of whatever I was eating before, what I used to think was like healthy, like toast, cottage cheese, like egg whites. I was like, this is protein. This is like some fats and some carb. We're good to go. My body was like screaming afterwards of like, absolutely not. So like blood sugars, is that kind of, in your opinion, like the main way to really tune into that, or more tuning into how you feel?
Like, you mean like actually getting a CGM and looking at
Yeah.
it? It's tricky because the CGMs, I think, are an amazing tool because you can see how your individual body is responding to things. But it's kind of similar, in my opinion, to like the food sensitivity tests, where it's like, let's not obsess over it too
Right.
much, because that again is like disconnecting us from like how we are actually feeling, because glucose spiking is your body, it's a natural mechanism, right? It's not necessarily a bad thing. If you're on the roller coaster where it's like spiking really, really high and then low and then high and then low, that's not good at all. But it does get complicated because everybody's body is so different when it comes to like our insulin sensitivity.
Mm,
And there's so many different factors, like what phase of your cycle are you on? During certain phases of our cycle, we're more sensitive to insulin, and others we're more resistant. So
okay.
it really, really depends. And I think the best way to do it is paying attention to how fatigued you are after you eat.
I,
Like for me and my individual body, I can't eat a ton of carbs because I feel crappy.
mm,
Some people can eat so many carbs and they're like, it's like you look at those girls that are like so shredded and they're like, what I eat in a day is like a gallon of oatmeal. And I'm like, what the heck? Like,
yeah.
if I ate that, I would feel like absolute
Yeah.
shit. So it's just like, you can't carbon copy someone else's diet. You have to pay attention to yourself and
Right.
be like, okay, how tired am I right now? Is my energy spiking and then crashing an hour later? Okay, maybe that meal wasn't great for me right now. But then it can vary day to day. You could have that same meal 2 weeks from now and your glucose doesn't spike.
Crazy. Crazy when you
There's so
think
many
that way.
variables.
Well, that's why I always wondered about, your thoughts around the intermittent fasting and the keto and all of that. Cause like for me, if I eat like too much avocado, I feel sick. Like if I eat like too much fat, cheese, whatever it is, I'm like, it knocks me out. I just do not feel good when I eat too much fat. So when you think about like these, I hate to eat, like, I guess that's what they are though. It's like their diets. Like if you think about these very specific meal plans or diets, is there any of those that you actually feel like, okay, this one to me gets across the line, the other one's not really into it? Is there any sort of diet that you found with your clients that actually, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, is pretty well rounded?
Paleo,
Okay.
I think.
Okay.
So paleo is basically like meat, vegetables, and fruits.
Okay.
And you can have like you can have carbs, you can have fats, you can have protein, like root vegetables, sweet potatoes, like all of that is fair game. I think with paleo and just like the clients that I work with that have like hormone imbalances and gut health issues and autoimmune conditions,
Mm,
a lot of the grains can be really inflammatory. So when you cut those out, at least like short term, I think people feel so much better because you're just like eliminating gluten, dairy, and grains. And those are the most inflammatory, not necessarily because of the grain, but because of like, and this is a whole other conversation, but like what is sprayed on the grains,
right.
the glyphosate and all that stuff.
Right.
So taking that out can really help people just feel better in a short amount of time.
Right. Right. And so say someone's like, okay, like they're listening and they're like, I have my checklist. I'm going through all of the sleep things. I'm going to change some stuff. I'm not going to watch The Office as much. Like I'm going to change some sleep things. I'm going to change some nutrition things. The other thing that I'm curious to get your thoughts on is movement. Because I think as women, let's face it, we get a lot of messaging of like, this is what you should do. You should do cardio. You should do, weightlifting. You should do whatever. And for me, personally, at least lately, I've been finding that like yoga has been really interesting to kind of have that connection between movement, but also the calming of the mind. Like I find after a very long day, when they're trying to essentially get you to stand on your head, you can't think about business. You can't think about work. And it's very
Yeah.
calm, I find. It's not something that's like a pump up energy. Because at the end of the day, obviously, we know movement on your body is still stress. So I'm thinking for the woman who's like right now trying to perform her best in her business, what do you think about movement? Like in the sense of if someone really wants to feel their best, is there something that you would say is your recommendation, or is it simply just move every day?
I think you need to have a little bit of everything. I think if you do too much of one thing, like if you're a very high stress person and you're constantly doing super heavy weightlifting or high intensity interval training, I don't think that's good. I think it's too much stress on the body. I think you should get one workout a week where you're like sweating a lot, like you can't breathe, like sprints or something like that.
Mm.
I think you should have one a week where you're doing like low impact, like yoga or Pilates. I do think weightlifting is very important because you need to have muscle mass on your body for so many different reasons. Longevity, insulin resistance, like if you have PCOS or something, like just throwing one out there, your body is a little bit insulin resistant for a lot of people. And so if you don't weight lift, your body doesn't have anywhere to put the glucose. So you need muscle to preserve, to have a good glucose level, but also like for longevity and health. So I think everyone should be weightlifting. You don't have to go like be a CrossFitter and like lift a ton of weight.
Yeah.
But like strength training in some aspect is really, really important.
Right.
And then walking, like I think having a little bit of everything and then seeing like what kind of balance feels best for you is good, because it's like with any diet, I think people get really attached to one way of being. Like I've been through phases where I'm like, yeah, I'm going to the gym, I'm going to get yoked. Like I'm just going to lift crazy weights.
Yeah.
And maybe that worked for me for a little and now it doesn't.
Right.
I got really into boxing at one point. I got really into hot yoga at one point. Like I think just getting exercise and getting those endorphins going is so important for a ton of different reasons.
Yeah.
And like just trying new things and just moving. Like we're meant to be moving. We're not meant to be like sitting at a desk for 10 hours a day, like you have to have that contrast.
Yeah. And I think the problem is like sometimes before you know it, you're working at your desk and you look up and you're like, oh my God, I haven't moved at all. And your body is seized. Like I was drinking tons of caffeine. I wasn't moving my body a lot because it was just like, oh, I was like really busy and I didn't have time to do it. And the amount, like literally night and day difference, just even doing, like, as you're saying, walking for an hour. I used to be like, well, what am I going to get from walking? Like, it's a walk. Like, what's going to happen? The amount of energy that I felt by just putting on a podcast, also getting in the sun has been insane. Like also in Canada, obviously, like we have really unfortunate winters, but when the sun is out in the morning, like I remember listening to the Huberman podcast talking about, getting out first thing as soon as you wake up, like it literally charges your energy for the rest of the day. And so when you think about trying to sustain your business for like a full work day while you're sitting at your laptop, I think it can be like, as we're going through all of these different areas, right? And the girl's like, okay, I got to fix my sleep. I got to fix my nutrition. I got to fix my water and my movement. So they have this list. And obviously like, why I was so excited to have you on is you work with so many of the exact women that are listening to this episode right now. So for the girl who is so ambitious in all the things that she's doing, she's a high performing woman. She has this list already of business things that she needs to be doing. But then now she's like, great, I have this awareness. This has been super valuable. Now what? If you were going to recommend something for someone to just get started on this journey of like really diving into their overall wellness, what would be something that you feel that you would recommend?
I think you have to master your mornings. Like in the morning, if you have to wake up like an hour earlier to go outside, go on a walk, and then make yourself a good breakfast, if you nail that morning, you're set up so good for the day. If you just go right into the workday, you're already flustered, you haven't eaten, and then you're 2 coffees deep, and you've been sitting in your apartment or wherever you work from, and it's 3 p.m. Now you're like, ugh, I'm so lazy to do anything else. I want to go to sleep after work. Then your whole day is a wash. Like if you dedicate yourself to nailing that morning, that first hour of your day, and like nourishing yourself, not just with food, but nourishing your mind, like meditating, going outside, getting sunlight, the rest of your day is going to be set up. You're going to make better choices because you already made that first decision of taking care of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I felt that before where like it hits 3:00 and you're like, I don't have time. And you're like, if I had done it in the morning, it was already done before the rest of the day has taken all of your time, energy, mental space, emotional space, all of the things. Right. So as always, thank you so much, Grace, for coming on. I think that this has just been so valuable for people listening to be able to go through and kind of like audit their life in a way, to look at things that maybe they're not focusing on right now that they need to be focusing on. And I think today in unpacking all of this, sometimes we feel like it's just a matter of like processing or strategically working through our problems. But I also think, and I'm sure you know this with your business as well, to achieve more in your business, like you have to have a battery, you have to have a capacity to be able to even perform in that way, to do the content and then serve clients and then do interviews and do all of these things. Like you have to have enough in your tank to do it. And I think a lot of the time we think if we just push through, we just work harder, that's the thing that's going to get us there. But I think so many people have these factors like we're talking about here that are working against them. And we're not considering that in going further and achieving more. I think today has been immensely valuable. And just thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. And that was so well said.
Yeah. So question, if people are feeling like, okay, like I'm activated, I want to take this seriously. Most of the women in our world who are like, I know what I want to do and I'm going to move on it quickly. If someone feels like they want support in doing this, maybe they've tried before. And hey, like guys, this was me. I literally was like, yeah, I'll do it. And then I ended up having to literally get a plan and get support because let's face it, you guys are so focused on crushing it in your business that you need a coach for your business. You need a coach for your health. Like you can really have a coach for anything. And I know Grace's work that she does with clients, it's so insanely impactful. So if someone feels like they're ready to get support, what would be the best place for them to find you, to connect with you? What are some different things that they could do if they're looking for support with this?
Yeah. So my Instagram is _graceful wellness. And if you go to the link in my bio, there's a coaching application if you're looking for one-on-one support. And I'm also launching a new program, which is called The New Leaf. And it's a 14-day kickstart into like basically everything we were talking about, getting you like off of that cycle of bad habits and that roller coaster of diets and really like mastering your morning and learning how to like tune in and understand your body. That's a group program. So that's another option if you're not looking for like a one-on-one coach.
Amazing. Alrighty, guys, you heard it. So if you're ready to do something about it, I would say message her on Instagram and get it going. And thank you so much, Grace, for everything today. And I hope today was helpful for you guys and that you feel like you have some lists of things you already need to press go on. And as always, guys, stay ambitious and we'll see you on the next episode.